All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. It is 1 after 10, so we will get started here with the Information Technology Oversight Committee and today's agenda. Before we start, would you please call the roll?
Senator Herron. Senator Nemes.
Present.
Representative Ull.
Here.
Representative Hodgson.
Here.
Co-Chair Williams.
Here.
Chair Lockett.
Here. All right, we do have a quorum, and we will proceed. We have the minutes from our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? So moved by Senator Williams. I have a second to approve the minutes. Second by Representative Hodgson. All those in favor?
Aye.
That was an enthusiastic aye. Good job, everybody. Those are approved. Good job. Good job. All right. So we have chosen today a discussion over the Kentucky Wired Network and some different aspects of that. We are going to go out of order from what is on the agenda. We're actually going to start with the Kentucky Department of Education, which is listed as the C item there. So I'll invite those guests to the table, David Couch and Mike, if you guys would come up. And please state your name for the record, your position, and then you may proceed. Could you make sure that your mic is on? The green light is nice and bright.
It's close enough. Yeah. Mine wasn't on.
There we go.
Want us
Okay.
to go again?
Yes, please.
It says it's green. Well, even greener.
Yeah,
Okay.
even greener.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Different shades of green we have here.
There we go. David Couch, I'm the Kentucky K-12 CIO and EdTech leader for all the schools and all KD agency.
Mike Lettingham, I'm the Director of Planning and Project Management in the Office of Education Technology.
So I'm going to spend some time, if that's okay, kind of giving you some background and educating you on the internet access for our students as it relates to on the school campus and beyond the school campus, and also as it relates to the Kentucky Wire Initiative, since that's part of your discussion today. And I've sent you some background information over the years. I sent you an email back in 1995, and Mike and I were both around in 1995. As the song says, it says we wore a younger man's clothes and had a younger man's hairstyle back then. But so we can definitely give you a historical perspective of the internet access in our schools going back to 1995. We're part of the Kentucky Education Technology System. It's KETS, K-E-T-S. And the legislature has been a big part of the birth of the KETS system across our state, which we're very grateful to. The birth of it and the continued excellence of it up here to 2025. In 1995, and it's one of the coolest things that I've been part of, we became the first state in the nation to have internet access to every school district. We became the first state in the nation to have internet access of high speed to every school and every classroom, which has positioned us well ever since that time to be a national leader, which we are, in cloud-based computing, just not in the K-12 arena, but all the government arena and also in the private sector arena. We are the national leader as far as doing that, and it started with this basis that we put in place in 1995. Mike was actually the project manager for us. He's in a different role now as one of our directors, and I was a director at the time when we put this in place. And when we put it in place, for the most part, that high-speed connection we put into the school systems was the highest speed ever put in a county system in Kentucky, by far. There was a certain number of counties that may have had internet access that wasn't dial-up. For the first time in most counties, this was the highest speed that was not a dial-up line. And while we were doing it, we also put in the financial management system, which some of you heard about Munis, which standardized across the state. the school information system. It was an instructional network primarily for teachers and students to use in the classroom, but it also be used for administrative purposes. We also put the first email system in place across the state, which was a Microsoft email system, which has changed flavors over the year, and the Office suite that we put in place back then. But I think it's important for you to understand the design because it still applies today, all these years later. So KDE put in what we call a KDE, Kentucky Department of Education Internet Hub, into every district. Typically, it's the most centralized school building within the district. A lot of times it was their central office, but it could be a high school. We also put them in KSD and KSB and also KDE agency because we typically like to use the same things that our school districts use to be more in touch with them. So we had more school districts back then. We had 176 versus 171 now. So we put a KDE Internet Hub in the centralized location in a school building in 176 locations, along with KDE agency locations, along with the FFA camp. So that was about 180 sites that we did back then. So if you take a look at that design, is once we put that Internet Hub in place, then we left it to the school districts on how they connect to that. And that's still in place today. So they could use a cable company. They could use their local telco. They could run the fiber lines themselves and have their staff manage it. Laurel County, for example, had their own staff put fiber in across their district and connect to our hub. Johnson County, where I'm from, is a mixture of that. So if they had a school building close to the central office, so Johnson Central, where I attended, and the middle school that was right there, they did those by fiber with their staff. But out in the community, like Flat Gap and Earl Springs and Meade, they used a local telco to connect that. So you had a variety of that across the state, and you still have that. And so also from an engineering point of view, and just understand is when we put the internet access in place, when the schools connected, they didn't have to go find internet access because they already had it in the district. So it's kind of like in your home. If you want to put another water line, you add a bathroom. You don't have to put another water main to your house. You only have to have one. You just got to connect to that one. Same thing with power in your home. So anytime a district added schools, they didn't have to add internet access. They just had to provide a line that connected to our KD Internet Hub. And so all these years later, that's the same kind of design, and it served us extremely well. The other part that served us extremely well during this time that we've been very savvy about from a financial point of view, and I think we've been an excellent steward of taxpayer funds since the very beginning of KETS, is we've maximized the financial opportunity. So there's no state that beats Kentucky if you take a look at the course of the federal E-rate program of maximizing the discounts. So the way we do our bids, we make sure we get federal discounts for that. And it's a big financial difference. It's up to 90% discount on what we pay. So the things that we do, we got to really make sure they are what we call E-rate eligible. And the U.S. Supreme Court just recently ruled on keeping that in place, by the way. It was like 2 weeks ago. But that's a very important financial part to us. It's about $10 million per year in discounts at the high-speed level, network level, but close to $50 million statewide annually for our schools. So the E-rate program has always been an important piece for us to put in place. We rebid that contract probably around every 10 years. Part of that time frame is you want to give other folks a chance to compete for it, and I'm all about competition. But the other part is you can't do it in a short time frame because they got to make such amount of initial investment. So you can't do these every 2 or 3 years, plus the work it takes to put these kind of things in place. So typically we have historically done it every 10 years. So if you take a look at around the 2004, 2005 timeframe and the 2015 timeframe, we also did another statewide bid. Now the current provider that did it before, one is the Prime, and they had a lot of subs that were out there. AT&T used to be Bell South back in 1995, won those and put those in place. But during that time frame, you kind of remember, as cloud became a big thing, and Kentucky was the first to really do cloud. And even compared to the corporate sector, the scale that we did is the largest in American history, and the most successful in American history putting in place. And we also had fiber to all the schools at that time. So some of them were put in place in different ways, but all had fiber during that time frame. And we were the first in the nation to meet the national standard of 100 kilobits per second internet speed per student. Now you fast forward it to around that same time frame. It was around the birth of Kentucky Wired in the 2014 and 2015 time frame. And there was some pressure for us to move over to that, even though we had just awarded a contract and we had that in place. And we told the folks that were leading it at the time that, first of all, it's not in place, so there's nothing for us to transition over to. We also made it very clear to them that they were being very over-optimistic in the time frame they thought they can get it in place. We estimated it would take them 8 to 10 years, which it turned out to be. Their time frame was significantly shorter than that. I think it was like 18 months to put it in place. So, but we did tell them is once you do have it in place, maybe in 10 years, you can be part of a future bid. The other thing is back in 2014 and 15, the way they put it in place was not E-rate eligible. As I mentioned, that's a big, important part for us for our schools. And just being forced to switch over to that, we would have lost a lot financially every year. And plus, it wasn't there. But we said in the future, you can be part of responding to the bid the next time we do that, which turned out to be 10 years later. The KH3 contract, like I said, we've had 3 versions of it. The Kentucky Information Highway. That version of the contract ended on July 1st, 2024. So, and it was E-rate eligible, which means you had to have all the sites off onto the new contract by that time frame and put in place and operational. And I've told you is how important the internet and the cloud-based is to our schools. From instructional perspective and administrative perspective, that has to go extremely well, which it did, the transition we put in place. So during that time frame is we stopped calling it the KH, we didn't go KH4, we call it the Next Generation Kentucky K-12 Internet. And for us, that has been a grand slam. And the note that I included for you all to take a look at, my communication to districts, and my communication to the vendor that won that, Education Networks of America, ENA, by Zayo. And ENA specializes in K-12 networks. That's what they do. And so they've been a good partner associated with that. But let me tell you why that's been a grand slam for us and such a success. We now have 1 megabits per student, which is the national goal. And I just think back in 1995, is how much more that is, because when 1995, what we put in place was for the entire district, and that's much more than we put in place in the entire district in 1995. The current contract is E-rate eligible, and the vendor that we have, Education Networks of America, is very savvy in E-rate. They specialize in K-12, so they're very savvy in that, which is important to us. The service is incredibly reliable and of very high quality, which is very important to us and stable. In comparison to the KH3, we pay 50% less cost for the bandwidth. We pay 38% less cost in the firewall services, which provide the cybersecurity defense across for all of our school districts. We have more functionality than we had before. Districts get more insight to how their network is operating or not operating. And I'm going to let Mike talk about some of the things at the very end as we were moving at a pace and on target to be completed by July 1st. We had some things happening that caused a change of design, and he'll give you some insight to that that impact the Kentucky Wired implementation. But just so you know, from the contract itself, ENA is the prime contractor, and they can pick their subcontractors. And one of the subcontractors they picked was Accelecom. There's a couple others that are in there, but one of the subcontractors they picked, which is Accelecom, which is also known as Open Fiber, which was selling the excess capacity of the Kentucky Wired network. Now I'm going to let Mike give some insight to that. Then I'm going to share with you the note that in the communications I had with KCNA about our concerns about changing it from this grand slam to another approach of things that got to be kept in mind with doing that. And then I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the home access piece, because that came up big. Obviously, anytime you talk about a big flu outbreak, NTI, or a pandemic, is making sure that's reliable, and what do we have for students beyond the school campus. That came up big. But on the school campus, a national leader in that category, and we're recognized by the other 49 states as being this. But I want to let Mike do more details about that.
So what we want to speak to is part of the design change, and it's functionally really not anything that changed. We're still providing the internet connectivity to every district hub. But our goal was to have this transition completed to the next generation K-12 internet before the end of June 2024. And part of what had to happen there is due to just provisioning and build out challenges. We had ENA, Education Networks of America, and their primary partner, Accelecom, had to implement more what's called Type 2 connections. And Type 2 connections are essentially where you have a local provider that's providing the electronics and the connectivity to extend that connection to the district. And so there was reasons that contributed to that having to be the case. Part of what that caused for us is for us to go past the June time period to be able to complete the implementation, to be able and to utilize those Type 2 connections and today there's 39 sites that have what is called Type 2 connections. The goal from Education Networks of America, ENA-ZAO, is to, and I believe Accelecom, is to transition away from those Type 2 connections to direct connections from Accelecom. But again, that caused us to go into July. The significance of that for us was that David mentioned the KI3 contract E-rate eligibility ended at the end of June. So therefore, we had to absorb the loss of those E-rate federal dollars going into July for the implementation to be completed due to those transitions not being able to be completed by the end of June. So again, there's 39 sites that are under the Type 2 connections today. The goal is to get those completed and transitioned off of Type 2 connections at some point. I can't speak to the when and what the schedule is for that to happen.
And Mike, if you could hit on toward the end, we had a situation where KCNA understanding was not approving those to be connected.
Yeah, I mean, our understanding of what contributed to that, and again, KCNA and Accelecom would speak to this better, is the rights to be able to build out the Accelecom connections directly to those districts. Those agreements were not able to be made or followed through between KCNA and Accelecom in order to avoid going to those Type 2 connections. And again, they would be better to speak to what contributed to that or what caused that, but I know we just wanted to make sure that was understood, that was a contributing factor of our transition not being able to meet the original time frame that we had hoped for.
So it does add complexity and cost when you go from a consistent design. Typically across our environment, we have standardization and consistency. It's easier to support, and typically it's less in cost. So there's a desire, I know, to try to switch those over, as Mike talked about. In late January, I was notified that there was the intention, and I think it happened the same day or the next day, for KCNA to remove Accelecom as one of the contract providers. And so we were, and you can see from the communications that I sent KCNA, our concerns that are associated with that, about the importance of keeping very high quality. Do not be over-optimistic. It's nearly over-optimistic on the ability to do that in a short time frame. I can tell you it's not like switching cell phone plans, like personal cell phone plans. It takes a whole lot more to do this size and scale. And just to make sure you understand the scale of it, Kentucky K-12, and I'm not saying we're more important than everyone else, but we're 25 times bigger than all the rest of state government and all the rest of local government combined as far as the amount of internet that we use. So this is kind of like a Fortune 100 kind of size organization is what we do as far as the dependence upon high quality internet being available, especially with our, with our being a national leader in instructional and administrative, cloud-based computing. So it was important for us to have high quality, no break in service. Make sure there's not a costing impact that impacts our cost of what we pay. I shared with you what we saved. Make sure there's not an impact to the E-rate functionality that we have, and make sure there's not a over-optimistic kind of view of what it takes to do a transition this size to something else. And once again, I emphasize what we have right now works incredibly well. Our school districts rated it in December. This is past December, is our top achievement. Every year we ask them what the top 5 things we did well, didn't do well, and what should our goals be for the following year. This was by far the biggest success that we had that they rated as far as our transition over to NGKI. Let me just spend a few minutes before I ask questions about internet access beyond the school campus. And obviously that came up big during the COVID, but I want to spend some time educating you a little bit about that as well. So Kentucky, more so than the other 49 states, we've tracked internet access at the home for about 20 years. And I don't understand why the other states don't do that better or did it at all. COVID cost them to accelerate, to try to track the percentage of students that had and did not have enough internet access to do schoolwork. And I want to make sure I clarify our definition. The instructional applications, administrative applications that we put in place try to be extremely frugal on the amount of bandwidth they consume. So it's unlike watching a movie, entertainment kind of things. You're watching a full-length movie at high definition. It's unlike playing video games, which typically take a lot of bandwidth. In fact, during COVID, we would tell folks to walk around the house, make sure no one else is watching a movie in the household or playing a game, because that would have a direct impact on the bandwidth service we have there. Before COVID, we thought the amount of students that didn't have it was between about 5 or 10%. Internet access to their home, enough to do their schoolwork, and felt pretty strong about it. We thought it was in the lower end, around 5%. During COVID, we did a name and claim, which actually went student by student to see if they had enough internet access at their house to do schoolwork. And if they didn't have it, there was a period of time where the wireless hubs were issued to students at their homes for a temporary basis to make sure they had some kind of capability of putting it in place. I can tell you, having tracked it, is around 5% of the students have indicated they do not have internet access to their home to do schoolwork. That was around the COVID timeframe. Since that time, it's gone down to 4.5%. That 4.5%, 3% is close enough to their home they can go and get access. And there's 1.5% that said there's nothing. And obviously, you don't write off the 1.5% or the other 3% there. But it's not 40% broke. During COVID, we kept on hearing 40% of the homes for students do not have internet access. And it was nowhere close. But it was revved up during that time. We were trying to put it in right proportion because it's easier to solve a 5% problem that is a 40% broke problem. So we were really trying to find out how big broke is this that we have to address, what it takes to put it in place. The other part that's educational, I think, for everyone involved is a lot of folks think the reason students don't have it is because they don't have a line available to their home. I can tell you that's not the big piece. It's the cost. Over and over again. It's just not us we found, it's nationally. The primary reason students don't have it at their home and parents don't have it. And you see these parents, we have 95.5%, despite their socioeconomic level, have found a way. And we have found typically parents, no matter their level of poverty, find a way for their kids. They just do that. I can say that as a dad of 4. You don't find a way for them. And they found a way. But we found the greatest inhibitor, and this happened, for example, in Covington. During COVID, they were talking about we don't have internet access available to these homes. And looking at the Covington area, there was 4 or 5 providers. So it wasn't a provider problem. It was what they were paying problem. So kind of keep that in mind. It's not always they don't have a line available to them. It's typically I can't afford the line that's available. And there could be 10 providers out there, 20. And so that's why we really try for all parents, make them aware of the discounts that are available to them, whether it's the federal Lifeline program, which has been around for quite some time. There was a federal program called the ACP program, which identified in my note that helped pay temporarily for about $360 a month for those low-income parents to do it. But that no longer went into place last July. But we didn't see a drop of doing it. So parents found a way to keep that service level high. And also, I would say I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, but once again, to educate folks, the highest percentage of students that don't have internet access beyond that 4.5% are not Eastern Kentucky, it's Western Kentucky. And so that always catches people. They're like thinking it's Eastern Kentucky, and my home county in Johnson County, which I'm very proud of. If you looked at my note, only 0.9% of those students don't have internet access available to their home. They've done a great job of fibering that entire community. I can say one of my former Johnson Central classmates had a company there that made that happen. Paul David Butcher, proud of Paul David doing that for us. I know not every county had that, but folks sometimes don't realize the kind of things are in place and not in place in these certain areas. So is there anything you want to say, Mike?
The only thing I would add when we talk about what we've done and how we've done it, I would encourage folks to compare what we've done and how we've done it to what goes on in other states when it comes to K through 12 internet connectivity. And, David and I both are part of organizations that represent other states, and they are quite envious of what we've done over the years and where we're at now. And, one of the things I've always been able to say is we have a very highly reliable and efficient and secure environment that we provide for our internet services. And David mentioned that we're meeting the national recommendation for the capacity to be provided per student. And there was a time where we wasn't meeting that, but we were still outperforming from a satisfaction level internet connectivity, and that's because we provide a very clean network. It's kind of one of those, you could provide 8 lanes of traffic, but it's all congested and backed up. You're not really getting much. But if you provide 3 lanes and it's free flowing and it's moving, then that's a better environment. And so again, we've always been really focused on making sure that all the services wrapped around what's being provided is providing a very clean, efficient, and reliable, secure environment. And other states will tell you that they would like to have what we've been able to have over the years and what we have today.
I hope the background emails and this was helpful to you, so I'll take any questions if you have any.
Well, thank you to both of you. Super helpful. Also, thank you for what you do. You guys are doing a great job, and we certainly appreciate that very much. We do have some questions, first of all, from Senator Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your testimony and the work you do on behalf of the students in Kentucky. It's great. And on behalf of the General Assembly to keep our costs down. It's good to hear that this next gen is significantly less expensive than last gen. So I did want to talk about costs, past, present, and perhaps future. So we lost E-rate. You had to transition and trying to get to next gen. What was the cost there? 2, currently, because we have all of these type 39 sites that are type 2, what's the additional cost of that? And 3, if you have to go through another transition, I presume the last transition was costly. If you have to go through another transition, what would you project the cost might be, the additional cost that we as the General Assembly are going to have to provide to you to serve the students just because of a transition?
Well, I'll let Mike get in part of the cost, too, is just not dollars. It's uncertainty that it will work. Mm-hmm. So that's part of a cost, because when you have something this high, when you highly dependent upon by schools, and mm-hmm. rightfully so, is when you're talking about suddenly changing from something to else, is you have a great amount of uncertainty on an unproven part of that. Especially when you have something that's very proven, that's very successful. So there's a cost associated with that. Obviously, we have a certain dollar amount that we have in our budget. So, for example, if we were immediately forced to rebid or that went more, we would have to lower the bandwidth speeds of school districts. That's the only way we can meet it, because we're not getting more immediately. So in order to keep, if the cost ever went up with any of this, is either we would have to come to you all and say we need more money to pay for this difference, or we had to turn down and ratchet down the bandwidth speeds that our districts are used to. And you would hear more complaints about things being slower instructionally and administratively. So, Mike, I'd like you to answer some of those.
So I don't have an exact figure for what that cost was of our overrun of the implementation. I'm going to tell you that was probably around $500,000 as far as that cost to exceed and that's, we can certainly get that exact number of what that was. Regarding cost to implement something new, to me, a big factor in that is if you're doing that well planned and well thought out ahead of time. In other words, you have enough time to plan that out appropriately, because what I'll speak to is part of the transition that we went through to NGKI. We had the appropriate time to plan that out, and with our new partner, ENA, Zayo Education, the way we implemented that contract was a lot of that duplication in cost during the transition period, which is a year to 2 years of transition period, really was absorbed with the way that contract was implemented and how they engaged in the implementation and the transition. If you do that in more of a reactionary mode and do a transition, you're going to not be able to avoid that duplication in cost of having your old network running at the same time that you're implementing the new network, and you have that overlap of cost. And so the way I would speak to that is for our connectivity and our internet access, that's approximately $11 million a year that we pay for that particular part of our service. So my worst case scenario would be if you have to overlap those environments for a year, you potentially could be looking for that cost. Now, it wouldn't be that, but that's the way I would forecast that, is it could be up to that much to overlap the two environments.
And I think you make a good point here is like, for example, ENA had the contract to do it for X amount of cost. So any kind of cost overrun, they ate. So we didn't have to pay it. So for example, when we couldn't get the last, 25 sites done because they were denied access to the typical way that we would connect them through Accelecom, then we lost the E-rate rebates for that. But ENA, paid us back for that because they're overall, the prime for doing that. So it wasn't a cost that the state ate. It's a state, and that's when you have good vendor partners. It's a partnership. They understood that was their responsibility to have it done by X date, and anything that caused it to overrun is they would have to eat that cost. Now, we don't want them to have to eat that cost for a year. And you understand when you do bids, it's got to work out for both the customer and for the vendor. I mean, they got to make X amount of money. You don't want to drive them into the ground, but also you want to get it at a good competitive cost and have those safety measures in place. And ENA has been an outstanding vendor partner for us, ENA by Zayo. And they understood is we did not budget for that, and that's something that they would have to eat, and they did eat that. So we did not feel that difference.
And I think part of the question you asked there, which we kind of hit on, but maybe not as directly, is the ongoing cost to maintain type 2 connections.
Yes.
Is not a cost that we're absorbing. It is a cost that ENA, Zayo Education, is absorbing. Now, we could kind of say, well, we're okay with that. They're just having to eat that, and that's part of the deal. Sorry for them. Well, the situation we want to avoid there is putting them in a place where they end up not being able to financially continue to provide this environment because they had to make changes to how their design is, which is what that was, and therefore they end up, and again, I can't speak for them as far as being in a situation where they're upside down in what they're providing to us in a service and what their financial business plan is associated to it. But today, that additional cost for those type 2 connections is something that they are absorbing. We're still paying the same price to them.
Follow-up question. You have a follow-up question?
Yes.
Okay. So those 39 schools, though, don't have the same level of service as all the other schools?
I would say
true?
that they functionally have the same level of service. The complexity, the underlying complexity behind that and being able to provide that is higher. Therefore, you're more susceptible to issues or, some kind of, performance challenges and the supportability because you have another layer of design in there, another provider, another set of electronics, and those networks have to talk to each other. But functionally today, I would say they would not know the difference. That is being provided functionally in a way that is comparable to the rest of the network.
But ENA would tell you that there's a difference. I mean, from their perspective, and maybe they would tell you that it is more sophisticated and time-consuming for them to do what they're doing. But our school customers and district customers, they have not noticed that difference.
Okay.
Good. All right. We have one more question from Representative Hodgson.
Yes, if you could you give me a fifth grade definition of what a type 2 connection is compared to a type 1?
Well, the way I will speak to that, so when you have a direct connection provider, they're providing all sets of electronics on both ends. Let's just envision a fiber connection going from point A to point B, and they're providing the electronics on both ends of that. When you have a type 2 connection, that provider is providing their electronics on both ends of their connection, and then at point B, they're having to communicate and switch over to another C to D network connection that also has electronics on both ends of it. And that type 2 connection is going directly into the district in our example. So it adds another segment to the network that's being provided. Both the connection involved and the electronics. The two networks are having to talk to each other.
Okay, so can you tell me, and again in fifth grade terms, what characteristics would cause a service to not be E-rate eligible?
Well, I can help out with part of that is typically you have to do it, like we've been doing since 1995, a state bid that included all the school districts. And typically you have to have the highest weighting is financial. At least has to be 51%. And the one I told you before was not based upon that. That's why we just couldn't go over to it. It did not have the parameters that E-rate requires, and especially the one with weighting. The weighting of the finances is number one.
Gotcha. Thank you.
One point I do like to make, I know there wasn't a question, I did miss this on the home internet access. One of the teaching points I wanted to make is we've been tracking the internet access from homes, I said, for 20 years. And just so you know, we can't see a big difference, over the past 10 years of that number improving. So, the folks involved with Kentucky Wired and their providers would have to tell you how much has changed over for the home access. We don't notice, there's not a noticeable difference, since Kentucky Wire has been in place, is the home access for students. So you can see those percentages are right around the same. And we don't know if that some of those providers, those middle mile providers, and there's like 25 of them out there, or not, the companies that provide internet access, if they switched middle miles over to Accelecom or not, we don't know that. But I'm just telling you, from that point of view, there's not been a noticeable difference in the percentage of students that have internet access at their home. It's been about the same. And some of that could be, the costing issue. No matter what you put in place, a parent can't afford it.
Very good. And I have, thank you, Mr. Chairman, one final question. So you're talking about EHA, but the people on the ground that actually interfaced with you and implemented this was Accelecom, right? So have you had any issues? They're the ones that we might thank for this smooth transition because it was EHA, but they were their subcontractor here in the state?
Yeah, I mean, I know when, I can just speak to you from our customers, whenever there's an issue with any of our hubs, they're incredibly responsive. And when you're in this business, it's 24/7. So just like I do, when you're providing these services, I'm available at night, weekends, holidays. These folks are too, because they want to make sure instructional time is not lost. So they work, from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. and making sure the next day it's available. So we don't interact with them directly. Education Networks America and Zayo does, but we see where they'll say Accelecom has been dispatched, they're on site, they'll be here, and the service level that we're understanding has been incredibly responsive and of a high quality.
Thank you very much.
All right, very good. Thank you, gentlemen, very, very much for your testimony. We're going to keep moving along and invite KCNA to the table, the Kentucky Communications Network Authority. Doug and Greg, if you would, make your way up. And if you would, state your name and titles for the record, and then once you do that, you may proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Doug Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director for KCNA.
And I'm Greg Gatson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for KCNA.
And I also have with me Christina Dahman, who is our counsel.
Okay, very good. You may proceed.
Thank you. So, as I said, I'm the Executive Director of KCNA, and the committee asked us to come and give an update on the status of the network. I want to do that really quickly, but let me kind of go through some background just to make sure we're all on the same page. As a reminder, Kentucky Wire is a statewide network. It's a presence in all 120 counties. KCNA is the state agency with the statutory authority to oversee the network and the contracts related to the network. Now, our network is operated and maintained by a contractor, Kentucky Wired Operations Company, who we call QWOC. It manages the network operating center. If there's a squirrel chew, a cut, a wreck, they'll go and repair that. If a site goes down, they'll go and repair that. So that's who actually oversees and manages our network. They'll tell us if there's a problem. Excuse me. So we directly serve state executive branch agencies, the administrative office of the courts. We serve KCTCS and the public universities. And right now we have 625 sites on the network. A total of 779 are planned. But that's a moving number. So if I came and see you 2 weeks from now, it could be 780 as we add sites, as COT asks us to add a location. Most of the remaining sites are in Western Kentucky. Only 4 KCTCS sites are left to connect, and then all of those KCTCS campuses will be on. And we recently connected 11 Kentucky State Police CUES locations, and that's a backup to the CUES towers, and Greg can speak to that much more fluently than I can. And finally, as an update, we are required by the agreement, by the contracts, to update our network periodically. It's set at a 10-year review. We are in the process of doing that. The first equipment should be received this month, and we'll begin changing out the equipment in the nodes at that time. And again, Greg can speak a little more eloquently about that than I can. So I know, just from what you've heard today, the testimony you've already been presented, that you want to know about the termination of open fiber. So let me get into that. As you know, the Kentucky Wired Network is built at approximately twice the capacity that we need to provide service over the term the 45 years through 2045, the 30 years, for state agencies and those other executive branch and judicial branches that we serve. Now, the point of that was we had this excess capacity. We would need someone to help us expand broadband into the Commonwealth. So if you remember, in 2014, 2015, broadband rates were slow, and we needed to expand it into those areas that needed it. And as Mr. Couch said, it's not just Eastern Kentucky, it's Western Kentucky. It could be Louisville. There could be parts of Louisville that are internet deserts, essentially. So that was the goal, the public purpose of this project. The secondary thing with the excessive capacity is that our contractor would go out, work with ISPs, connect them. They would expand into those areas. And there's a revenue share model where they would share some of the income with us that they produce from doing that. That would help to offset the costs. So in 2017, we entered into the contract with Open Fiber, Accelecom. Probably easier to just refer to them as Accelecom, because I think that's the term you all are the most familiar with. And essentially, they were our sales team for that. They were going to go out and they were going to market this. And as I said, there was a revenue sharing agreement, but that agreement has terms and conditions, like all contracts, that they have to comply with. Unfortunately, as you know, since we're here, that contract's just not worked out as intended. We've had some issues. We gave them notice of our first breach of contract over a year ago. We've issued 3 notices of default. And just highlight some of those issues. They've remitted less than $20,000 total to us as part of that revenue sharing. That's for 1 dark fiber lease. They have not provided open access to the network, meaning that there have been entities that have contacted them to request dark fiber, have been unable to reach an agreement with them to do that, or been told it's not offered as a service. Now, that's what they tell us. You may hear a different story today. They've connected to the network without permission. We have a temporary restraining order that the Franklin Circuit Court ordered, prohibiting them from connecting to the network without our permission. At that time, we had only identified a couple of sites. Since that time, we've identified 38 additional, and there may be more. Our investigation continues, and we work with Quock, our contractor, on that as well. As I said, local ISPs tried to request some dark fiber. In fact, one of those ISPs that was denied has now sued Open Fiber. And we've asked them to update how much revenue we're entitled to. They've refused to do that. They've declined to tell us what the revenue share may be over the term of the contract. But keep in mind that they did tell the Legislative Oversight Committee that it would be 2032 before you would receive the first penny of lit fiber services. So, as I said, litigation's ongoing. We provided you, the committee staff, with some of those decisions. The Secretary of the Finance and Administration Cabinet determined that they could not provide last mile service, so they couldn't sell to a particular business entity just there. They should only work through as a wholesaler, not as a last mile provider. And as I said, the Franklin Circuit Court has entered its TRO, and they can't connect to the network without our permission. There are rules to follow in the contract, and they're not following them. The termination of this contract has no impact on the provision of services by KCNA to the agencies that it serves. They continue to be served by us. Quock takes care of that and oversees that. It's important for you to remember that. One other thing we did is to validate that there was a dark fiber market, because that was one of the issues that came up. We engaged a consultant, CTC. They did a study and determined that there is a dark fiber market in Kentucky. And in fact, that maybe a quarter of BEAD eligible grant locations are within 1.5 miles of the network itself. So that's a good opportunity that's been lost, frankly. But I want you to remember, of all the things that we say today, the Kentucky Wired Network is taxpayer owned. The taxpayers paid for it. And the taxpayers continue to pay for it. You know that. And it's our obligation to make sure that our contractors meet their obligations to us. And if we didn't, you would probably pull us to this table and ask me why we're not. So that's what we're doing here. We're just trying to make sure that the taxpayers and its investment are protected. Now, as we'll discuss at length, I'm sure, the Franklin Circuit Court did order us to give notice to Accelecom's customers, 30 days minimum, that they would be disconnected. In April, we have sent those notices out to people. Nobody has been disconnected yet. They continue to receive service from Accelecom. We want to give them time to find an alternate internet provider. And I can just speak from my own experience in speaking with those customers. All of them had internet service before. Now, when we go to disconnect, which we will do at some point, and we're working with Quack on that, they will get another notice, another 30-day notice. So it's been 3 months. Those customers have had time to explore their options. And we understand that it was going to be disruptive to do this. We didn't want the disruption. But at some point, we had to take that step to protect the Commonwealth. So you may hear some fear-mongering today. I would tell you to ignore that fear-mongering. Everybody that's being served by them continues to be served. That includes K through 12. We've discussed that with ENA. I've discussed it with Mr. Couch and KDE and told them, you are not going to lose connectivity because of what's going on with open fiber. We stated that in court. So with that being said, welcome to take your questions.
Actually, in terms of the cost, when you look at the cost of switching providers, you look at the cost of the impact of Accelecom in terms of the state. Do you have an estimate in terms of what this will cost taxpayers to make any kind of switch due to this?
Oh, you mean if we replace Accelecom?
Yes, sir.
No, I don't know that there should be any cost. It would depend upon if it's a revenue share agreement like this one that we have now, there should be no cost to them. There's lost opportunity in revenue share that's lost while this new wholesaler would be getting up to speed, but there should not be any outlay of costs, not like a traditional contract.
Okay, thank you. Representative All.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 quick hits if I could just go through them.
Very quick 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, you said the revenue share model. We talked about that just a little bit in the testimony. You said it was about 20,000-ish to date from 2017. When the agreement was put in place, the contract, the model, what was the expected revenue share over a year or to date? Give me some kind of background on what we would have expected in the revenue share space.
We can give you the exact number.
I just want ballpark. Or
The ballpark that I recall that McQuarrie told the administration at that time, which would have been the Bevan administration, was $1.3 billion over 30 years.
1.3 over 30 years, billion.
Billion with a B.
Okay, and we've gotten 20,000 to date?
That's correct.
Okay. There are allegations and the termination letter around the unauthorized connections in these sites. Could you explain or speak to that?
Sure. The contract requires that when Open Fiber wants to connect a customer, they submit documentation to Kentucky Wired Operations Company. They are also a party to this wholesaler contract. They needed to be because they had to make sure that whatever Open Fiber did didn't adversely impact the network. So they would submit that documentation to them. Quack then submits it to us. And in that, through this documentation, they have to demonstrate what the value is to the Commonwealth. We've had some disagreements on that. There are some that we've rejected outright, some that Quack has held in not being the request for connections. Changes is the term that we use for that. It's a contractual term. But, excuse me, we discovered that they were connecting, splicing into the network in locations that Quack was unaware of.
Okay. And then you talked about the disconnect notices to the current customers. I'm assuming, and I don't want to do that, I'm assuming some of those would be school districts. Is that correct?
No, that notice would have gone to ENA because ENA is the customer to Open Fiber.
Okay, but would school districts be the sub down or whatever the final person who would be subject to some of those disconnections?
We would disconnect fibers that ENA uses to serve those schools, but as I've said, we pledge not to do that.
Okay.
Not until they find an
even
alternate.
though the testimony from KDE is they're using Accelecom or whatever, as one of their vendors to get that, the school districts themselves, even if this goes through court and is litigated and the final verdict is the disconnecting, the school districts themselves would not lose connectivity.
Not until they find an alternate provider. So if ENA comes up and says they're going to go with somebody else, then that's fine, they can do that. then we would disconnect. But we will not, they'll continue to receive Accelecom service until that time comes.
Okay.
Let me make one point clear on that too. How many changes did we get roughly for schools, Greg?
We received, I think, something less than 100 changes.
So what that means is, so those less than 100 are being served using our network. Accelecom's using other parties to provide to those others. And we don't have any insight into that. But that's, that was Accelecom's option.
Can you address, you mentioned before that you had discovered 38 sites total that were being used without permission. How did you discover those?
So as part of the court order, the Franklin Circuit Court ordered them to provide a list of customers. And we compared that list of customers to the list of change documents that we had received and approved. And some of those that were rejected showed up as being active customers.
Okay. Representative Hodgson.
Could you clarify how many schools would be affected by the potential Accelecom disconnect and have to switch over to another vendor? I thought I heard a number of 5, then I thought I heard a number of 39. So,
Well, it would be whichever ones ENA serves,
Okay.
right? So, and if they serve them all. But if Accelecom is using a different provider and working with ENA that doesn't implicate our network, I don't think those would be.
so you don't know the number of schools that could be affected by this?
I can only tell you that the changes that we've approved would be up to that 100, but we would have to look at it further to see what that would be. But again, let me state this again, and you're going to get tired of hearing me saying this. They are not going to be disconnected. Not until ENA is prepared to move to a different provider.
Okay, I understand. So how many schools would be at risk of having to move having to have ENA move to another provider?
We've approved changes for approximately 100 schools. I don't know about the other 70 or so that are being served by different manners.
Okay.
Senator Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So before you assumed this position, what was your background? Have you ever worked for a telecom company? Have you ever been in an executive position for a telecom company? What was your background or experience in the telecommunication industry?
I'm a lawyer by training. I've worked in private practice. I worked at a mid-sized law firm. I worked at a large regional law firm in private practice here in Kentucky. A lot of my work was tax work, but I also worked for the Public Service Commission. Then I've been a state employee, a public servant most of my career. I worked for the Department of Revenue, the Finance and Administration Cabinet, and their Office of General Counsel. Then I became the General Counsel for KCNA, and I've been with it since 2015, and I became the Executive Director in 2022. So no, I have not been an executive at a telecommunications company.
Yeah. So what is there in your executive branch? I mean, and your advisors, your COO, have they experience in the telecom industry?
Oh yeah, Greg is an AT&T employee, former. He's my chief operating officer. He's a professional engineer. We have, how many other engineers, Greg?
I think we've got about 5 others that would have background in the telecom industry.
Yeah. So we have like one employee, Eric Johnson. He specializes in outside plant, so he's the guy we use for that. We have other guys that do other things. We have a network architect. So we have the experience, and we need to have that experience so we can make sure that Quoc is doing what it does. This is part of our statutory oversight requirements, that we have some expertise. And that's who I rely on. I rely on Greg for that. That's why I bring him to the table with me. So when you ask me a technical question that I, as a lawyer, can't answer, Greg can answer that question for you.
Very good. One of the concerns here is that we hear from KDE, the technology, that there hasn't been any problems. And Greg, I mean, I think you know the industry. They can't move on 30 days. We've got a lot of last mile stuff that Accelecom has done. Did you have any misgivings about sending a letter out to everybody, all these, and I'm customer focused, okay, not necessarily Accelecom code. I'm customer focused. What did you think the impact of sending that out to all these customers who, like KDE, they got a 10-year contract or they got long-term contracts, and they know they can't just go out and get somebody, and it's going to be a cost to them. if they do, and not just in money, but in disruption. I mean, is that something that you've had experience doing with AT&T in the past?
I've
These
had-
terminations?
Not necessarily in this specific arena, but I have had experience with customers for almost 40 years now with the various telecom companies that I've worked for. As far as having any misgivings, we were directed to provide that notice from the Franklin Circuit Court. So as far as us having misgivings, I don't think so. I mean, the notice was a warning, if you will, that this was on the horizon. It was not a 30-day, you're going to be disconnected within 30 days. It was an advance warning that at some point there will be a 30-day notice, at which point we will disconnect Open Fiber's facilities. Open Fiber could still provide service via other means, as was talked about before. They could provide service via a Type 2 connection. If that is the way that they choose to proceed, they just would not have the ability to use our transport services. That happens all the time in telecom, where people go out and they may obtain service from one transport provider one day, and they could transition to another at another day.
Yeah, but they usually plan ahead. May I have one
more question.
Just one more question, Mr. Chairman. So you mentioned earlier that you're doing the network refresh. Of course, with the network refresh, we know the technology has advanced such that you don't actually need all those fibers. You've got an order of magnitude more capacity over the same fiber than we had 10 years ago. But in that network refresh, I'm trying to figure. So Quock is a private corporation, is what you said, but you is
That's
that
correct.
true?
That's correct.
Okay. But you all have approval over the bids they award or what they can do, right? I mean,
No.
And
No.
no. So
No,
I
I mean-
understood
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I
that
interrupted you.
Quock had initially gone with a vendor, Accelecom's proposal, which was significantly lower than any of the other bidders on this by maybe $10 million a year over the next $10 million. That's 10 years, that's $100 million. But that you directed them to not perform, and that you sole sourced or directed them. How did they went to Ledcor? Did Ledcor bid on that? Who directed them to Ledcor? Why did you reject the bid that essentially looks like it's going to cost us maybe $10 million a year over the next 10 years on that? What was your thought? I mean, were you the ones that did it, or did, as I've heard?
As Paul Harvey says, here's the rest of the story from what you've heard. This is Quock's procurement. This is a subcontractor to Quock. Ledcor is a subcontractor to Quock. That is who the service provider is. And without getting into too much detail, that's who actually goes out and fixes a squirrel chew, for example, is Ledcor. That's the service provider. The refresh regarding the equipment, they could make a recommendation to us under the contract. We can dispute it. So I disputed it. And I disputed it because of Open Fiber's conduct, splicing into the network without approval, and all the other things that I've listed. Why would we want to have anyone like that have control over our network? That shouldn't just offend me. It should offend you. But that was the position I took, and Quock decided to go the other direction and stay with Ledcor.
Wow.
Now, as it relates to the refresh, the equipment itself, the capital project that we have is for $12 million, which is significantly less than the $44 million that Macquarie told us it would be. So we're bringing it in $32 million less than what Macquarie said in 2015. It's $12 million. It's not $10 million a year. I'm not sure where you get that number, but I mean, if you can give me more information, I would be glad to address that further.
Okay, well, maybe that will come out. But the key is you're the one that nixed the contract.
I disputed their recommendation, and they ultimately decided that they would stay with Ledcor.
It's a recommendation. You just said it was their contract to let, and you disputed it.
I had the right to dispute it under the contract.
Okay.
I mean, you can look at the project agreement; it's in there. I'll be glad to send that section.
So
to
it's
you.
really you as a state agency's choice on what vendor was selected.
No. I can dispute it. If they disagree with it, we can go to the secretary under the model procurement code. That's how the contracts work. So they could have stood their ground.
So this was a contract that should have been performed under the model procurement code. Is that what you're saying?
No, that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it is a Quock contract. You understand that. It's Quock subcontractor.
Well,
I didn't, when this new building that you're doing out there, you don't have a contract directly with the painter. You have a contract with the general. That's who Quock is.
I'm going to let this go. But I do want to say my concern here is that we have a private entity who is not following the our model procurement protocol, and they are going to a state agency who would have to follow the procurement code, and that state agency has the ability to direct whether they can or can't do a specific dispute. So the question here is, should that have been done under the model procurement code, or should you have had no say over what happens?
Senator Williams, I'll note that there is a pending court case as to that question. It has gone through the Finance and Administration Cabinet, is now pending in the Franklin Circuit Court. So just going to provide that for your education here, that is now presently an issue that's pending in the Franklin Circuit Court.
So we are going to go ahead and move on just due to time. So thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Now I would invite to the table Accelecom, Brad, Kevin. If you gentlemen would please come and state your name, your title for the record. And then after you've done that, you may proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. I'm Brad Kilby. I'm the CEO of Accelecom.
Good morning. Kevin Marino, Tortorella, and Boyle. We're legal counsel to Accelecom.
Before I start with my prepared remarks, I just want to thank Mr. Couch and the folks at the Kentucky Department of Education. We take tremendous pride in supporting the mission. My wife is a retired school teacher, so I have a soft spot for students, and to hear firsthand from our end customer that they're seeing quote unquote incredible service is something we take tremendous pride in. Dear members of the committee, as I mentioned, I'm Brad Kilby, CEO of Accelecom Holdings. I'm joined today by Kevin Marino, our legal counsel. It is essential for us to rebut the baseless statements made by KCNA not only today, but over the past. Before I do so, let me remind you what Accelecom has done for the Commonwealth before I remind you what KCNA has done to the Commonwealth. Accelecom was formed in 2015 to market the excess capacity of the Commonwealth's network because the bondholders denied KCNA the right to directly market this network. In retrospect, as you saw from behaviors already demonstrated today, this was an excellent decision on their part. No other counterparty could be found to work with KCNA, so Accelecom was selected to provide that service. Over time, we've invested north of $125 million in private capital in Kentucky. We have been an excellent employer over that time. We have connected north of 200 customers across Kentucky. We provide essential telecommunication services to students, as you heard earlier, healthcare systems, universities, and government entities. We also provide various services to internet service providers, the folks that actually provide broadband to the homes and the students that you heard today. And included in those services is also dark fiber. We have spent extensively on both the promotion and the marketing of this network for the benefit of the Commonwealth. In search of our web presence, our social media presence, participation at industry events, and a study of our sales force, which has been active for 10 years, including 6 years prior to the network being ready. You heard a stat today that of KCNA's end clients, they still, 10 years into this program, have clients they have not connected in Western Kentucky. As well as a review of our database will show you the effort, the expense, and success we have had despite repeated impediments imposed upon us by KCNA. Despite a 6-year delay, you heard them reference and acknowledge that. Yes, 6 years delay in the implementation of this network. Accelecom is provisioned north of 790 customer circuits. That is more than 10 times the Commonwealth assumed when we initially deployed this in their 2017 estimate. And with a 6-year delay and continued obstruction and opposition in us turning up customers, we have achieved just that. We have deployed numerous times during natural disasters, whether those are floods, whether those are tornadoes, at our own expense to provide critical telecommunications services, not only to the businesses we serve, but also to constituents to include in Eastern Kentucky. You heard us reference before that we responded to a KCNA maintenance RFP that by our calculation would have saved the Commonwealth north of $10 million a year in operating expense. Above and beyond that, however, there's also capital projects and appropriations for purchasing things back, such as the huts, which would not have been required. The equipment refreshes that were referenced, those would not have been required as well. So you heard a $44 million figure that could have been avoided. And once again, only to see this RFP withdrawn when we were deemed the winner. It's very hard to accept that KCNA is a good, let alone fair and financial steward of the taxpayers' dollars. We continuously receive praise. You heard it directly from Mr. Couch, from our customers regarding the customer and network experience that we provide. I know some of you worked in the IT industry. We are maintaining right now network availability, Senator Williams, of 4 nines. 99.99% of the time, our network is available for students, businesses, and internet service providers. Yes, we have maintained uptime of 99.9%. Considering the mismanagement of the underlying network by KCNA and its near constant state of dispute with every vendor, including us, this feat is truly amazing. We even rebuilt, and I believe this committee is aware, every single telecommunications hut in the state of Kentucky at our own expense in an expedited time frame in order to prevent yet another lengthy delay in the implementation of this network. We did this because KCNA lacked the budget and the capabilities. The huts are a perfect microcosm of the problem with KCNA. We incurred the expense, we managed the process, we still to this day own the huts, and we gave the Commonwealth a sole and exclusive right to repurchase these at any time for the cost plus an 8% cost of capital. KCNA, which mismanaged these huts from day one, is the reason we are involved. They can't even get Accelecom a check after 2 attempts. The reason, supposedly, for the disputed amount for what those huts cost. We have no idea why they asked the Appropriations Committee for $12 million and allegedly sent us a check for $8 million. We have no idea why they sent us $8 million when they know this amount is in dispute. You heard it today. The executive director, he's a lawyer. The entire organization is comprised of lawyers. They somehow have no idea where the check is. They've yet to be able to messenger this check to us. They claim in no attempt have tried to place a phone call to me or to my counsel as to where to send it, as well as whether it's been received. This is a perfect and simple example of the incompetence and bad faith. For years, we have made accommodations and concessions to KCNA in the spirit of the partnership. You heard me reference before, we rebuilt the huts. Meanwhile, KCNA has continued to struggle with and sue not only us, but other vendors and counterparties. Our productive relationship with KCNA actually came to the end in the summer of 2022. That is when Mr. Hendricks assumed the role of executive director. Working together, Mr. Hendricks and his current general counsel, Adam Atkins, have since blocked nearly every circuit we have tried to provision for our customers, including, as you heard reference, KDE. Also blocking our connections for internet service providers, as well as the sale and the implementation of dark fiber services. Forget that they have no right to approve circuits, a point we will ultimately win in court. Forget that for years they approved circuits without so much as a peep. They then went on to reject every circuit, asserting they have a unilateral right to do so, when pressed repeatedly for a rubric or empirical mechanism on which they base this decision and on which we hope to find a common ground. Even if we did not agree, they could provide nothing. In fact, I challenge this committee to get the empirical framework by which this group, which I think has been acknowledged, has no telecommunications or financial experience or expertise, is making their decisions. They have rejected schools. They have rejected healthcare clinics. They have rejected internet service providers, including the sale of dark fiber. They assert the right to have unchecked decision-making on who benefits and does not benefit from the Kentucky wired network. Under their rules, if they do not like your business, your county, your politics, your church, they feel they have the ability to reject it. And we have no right to appeal outside of the court system. We have spent more than a year trying to find common ground. Accelecom is the reason this network continues to function and is bringing value to the Commonwealth, to your businesses, and to the constituents. We will not give up on our customers. Senator Williams, similar to yourself, customers are always at the forefront of how we operate. But we can no longer be bullied by an unchecked agency. We are confident no one is willing, let alone capable, of stepping into our shoes under these conditions, and we have offered KCNA a right to seek a replacement. One of the many offers, many compromises and concessions that they have neglected. There is still value to be had for the Commonwealth. We are rational, civic-minded, mission-oriented, experienced, but we are not afraid of what the forthcoming audit, and I believe we'll have someone speaking next on this, in litigation will uncover. In fact, we welcome the light that will be shed on this situation. The time has come for unelected representatives of the people of Commonwealth of Kentucky to step in and right this wrong. Thank you, and now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Marino to share some additional comments.
First of all, I want to echo Mr. Kilby's thanks to the committee for giving us this opportunity and giving me the opportunity to speak very briefly. This is really a tragic situation. Accelecom, as you heard this morning, has been incredibly responsive, has performed in an extraordinary fashion. We have also gone to KCNA since this dispute arose and said, please sit with us. If you do not like the contract that was negotiated, if you feel it needs to be revised or reformed, there is nothing off the table. We want to meet with you. Tell us what it is about this contract that you think is not workable. We are open to considering it. We are open to renegotiating it. They don't want to do that. Now, I listened to a couple of pretty extraordinary statements today as someone who's been involved in this litigation for well over a year. First of all, the suggestion that the judge is the reason these notices were sent is just completely false. They canceled the contract. They unilaterally said it's over. And the manner in which you heard the termination notices described is also completely false. What they said was they sent out notices saying, you are going to be disconnected in no less than 30 days. That's a disconnection notice that threw this entire relationship into chaos. It was not that the judge ordered it. The judge said, give them the addresses of your customers. That was after they canceled the contract. And the suggestion that Quack is the reason that the service provider did not become Accelecom, even though it was by far the best bid, is nonsense. Eventually, after some light cross-examination from Senator Williams, we heard what actually happened, which is this leadership, Mr. Hendricks, cancel the contract. That's how it works. Now, this is pretty simple and straightforward. We would love to mediate with them and have tried to mediate with them. They proposed a gentleman by the name of Christian Binnig. Mr. Binnig, unlike Mr. Hendricks, has 30 years of experience in telecom. He was the mediator. You should have him come here and talk to you. He will tell you how they comported themselves at that mediation. They did not come to mediate. They came to demand everything they could possibly get if they were able to win every point in this litigation, which they cannot and will not. They couldn't even tell him after hours what it was that they wanted. So has Accelecom been a great partner? Yes, it has. Before Mr. Hendricks and Mr. Adkins took control, every single connection we proposed was approved. After they took control, they unilaterally decided that they would not approve them. And you cannot get one principled reason as to why that happened. Not one. If you ask them, I would invite them, lay forth the reasons. They will tell you there is no conceivable way other than this is our unilateral determination. This business about dark fiber, they gave away more than 100 times the amount of dark fiber that we could have sold. They gave it away, even though the wholesaler agreement gives Accelecom an exclusive right to sell it. And there isn't a word in that agreement that suggests that our sales are limited to we can only be a wholesaler. Wholesaler is defined in the agreement as Accelecom Open Fiber. So that they will ultimately lose also. This business about the huts is outrageous. An $8 million check is sent through the mail to someone who's in your town who is supposed to be your partner, and you never follow up on it. They never receive it, and it's for the wrong amount. I mean, it's extraordinary. What's really going on is we know that you spent over $11 million rebuilding these huts. We're going to send you a check for $8.5 million in the hope that you will sign it. Because if you do, well, then that's it. You accepted it. There are many other things to say, but not to belabor it too much. Today, we got a decision from the secretary, and that decision had to do with the audit. What KCNA tried to do, instead of simply having these auditors, these independent auditors, come in and do an audit, which we absolutely welcome, they said, we want Blue to do the audit, and we want you to sign it, and here are all the representations we'd like you to make. You engage them, you sign this letter. We said no. Today, the secretary said we were right about that. We do not have to sign that letter. We do not have to buy into any of that. And we've always told them, we so welcome an audit. I don't want to overstay my welcome. I appreciate very much this opportunity to speak with you. I implore you once again, bring Mr. Binnig in, do something. This litigation is not the solution. I've been a litigator for more than 40 years, and I can tell you it is not going to solve this problem. The only way to solve this problem is to actually start acting like a partner. Sit down with your partner that has been described as incredibly responsive and treat them like a partner. And once that happens, whatever they want to talk about with this agreement, whatever they don't like, we've made a rash of proposals, all of which have been rejected. And we are still here, as Mr. Kilby said, ready to sit with them at any time, take it out of the court system, sit down in a room, resolve it, and start serving the taxpayers. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get to questions, I just have a couple myself. One, there were several things that were said by KCNA about notices of default. I would love to hear your response to two of those. Number one, that you have currently sent less than $20,000 back to the taxpayers of Kentucky. Could you please address that, please?
There is no default whatsoever in that. What they are suggesting to you is it's an interesting way to present it. They said, this is the amount of money that we were supposed to get over a long period of time. We've only received $20,000 today, and here's why. I'm happy to have you, Mr. Kilby, respond to that, but it's not a default in any shape or form. Take a look at the contract, okay? If they don't like the manner in which the contract is written.
How is the contract written?
It is written, so, and can you explain this?
So the way the revenue share is written, Depending on the type of service, there is a gross revenue contribution. Depending on the type of service, there's a net revenue contribution.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we provide a quarterly. It's one of our contractual obligations, which we've always adhered to. We provide a quarterly revenue report. And in the 2.5 years I've been the CEO of Accelecom, the only response we've typically received when we provided that is thank you. There's been no follow-up.
Is the $20,000 figure accurate?
I will need to circle back with the committee. I don't have that exact dollar figure.
Okay. Is it close?
Let me circle back. I don't want to make a speculation.
Okay.
But I think if I can just
Real quick.
Surely. One of the things that we said to them is, you've approved all these connections. Now you've stopped approving them, and you've stopped approving them on economic grounds because you said we've only gotten $20,000 or whatever it is. Something's wrong. The answer to that is, then sit down with us. We will explain to you how this revenue share is supposed to work, and we are open to revising it. They said no. They don't want to sit down and talk about it. What they want to do is terminate the relationship, largely because the people who are now in charge do not understand the relationship or the contract.
Okay. The second question is this. They made an allegation about connecting the network without permission, connecting to the network, splicing, these types of things. 38 sites total. Could you please address that?
Please.
So, as their general counsel mentioned, there's a number of things right now that are going through litigation within the Franklin County Circuit Court. This particular matter is one of those. That is a false allegation. To be crystal clear, that is a false allegation. There have been affidavits and information shared with the courts highlighting the approvals, both in email and on phone conversations and standing calls that took place, authorizing the work to be conducted.
Okay, thank you. We do have some questions. Representative All, I know you have a couple. If you could trim that down to one, that would be great.
You kind of asked the same things. Revenue share
That's
and
a
the
big shock,
unauthorized
right?
connections. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to just you got half of my answer on the revenue share in that response, but the thing that I'm trying to understand, and I'm not reading the contract here, but you've got 790 or so active circuits that should be producing some kind of shared revenue to the Commonwealth through the contract. And whether it's 20 grand or 40 grand, it's nowhere near the millions that we would have expected by this point in time. So why, if we were told in 2016, 17 that over 30 years it was going to be 1-point-something billion, why are we so out of whack with what we would have expected to this point?
So I was not present when that this alleged projection was shared. But as I mentioned before, this network and the actual deployment of it and having it ready for customers was delayed by 6 years. So right out of the gate, Representative All, you're unable to turn up a customer that you've actually executed a contract with when there's no network to be utilized. Above and beyond that, I know a number of you have worked in the IT services. There's price compression that takes place. When you look at services such as lit services, 1 gig and 10 gig, the price compression that's taken place on that has probably dropped by nearly 90% over the course of the past 10 years. Above and beyond that, for lit services, it is a net revenue. So it's not just the gross revenue. It also factors into that the costs that we've incurred to deploy the services for our customers.
And I can also say that the dark fiber issue is a very significant issue. They gave away, totally improperly and totally in violation of the contract, 100 times the dark fiber that we could have sold. The dark fiber market also is not consistent with what they anticipated it to be. So that's that. I also heard during testimony by KCNA today that we have not made any effort to sell dark fiber. They refused to approve dark fiber sales. So, and also on the subject of the net versus gross, I will tell you that one of the proposals that we made to them in January of 2024 was, let's figure out a way to reconfigure this net versus gross so that you can realize money coming over the transom sooner. Let's work that out. That was completely rejected. I can assure you, when you read the contract, and it is very detailed, and there are a number of, you can see contracts that cross-reference one another and so forth. When you read it, the manner in which they are being paid is perfectly consistent with the contract. I am 100% certain that that will ultimately be determined, but it doesn't matter. We're not standing on ceremony. We're saying, look, you don't like the way this is working. You have a partner here that's doing a great job, that's willing to renegotiate with you, that's willing to mediate with you, that's willing to do anything but have you say, you're out of here, and yet all they want to say is you're out of here. It really makes no sense. And I think the heart of it is things were going along just fine before the present leadership took over, and they just don't know how to do it. It's not something just anybody can do.
All right, we are going to move on to our next question, Senator Williams.
Thank you. I'm going to make a little statement, then I'm going to ask a question to see if this. One of the problems we have with this is the government being involved in a very dynamic, fast-moving industry. And this goes actually preceding the Bevin administration that was mentioned, going back to the first Bashir administration. They made projections based upon the technology at the time that anybody who knows technology were not likely ever to be true, okay? And as it turns out, you said 90%, an order of magnitude decrease in price and probably with an order of magnitude increase in speed has been what the industry has done every decade, and that's what we should have expected back then now. So I'm not sure the economics. I think the Bevin administration tried to do the best they could with what they were handed at the time. But this has been a big loss for the state. And it's a difference between the way KDE runs things and the way I see some state agencies. KDE, they contract out, they farm things out. They don't try to be the expert in every detail thing. They contract out their email, they contract out their networks. They do a great job of managing those contractors. We get in trouble when the state tries to actually operate these contracts, telling a contractor you can or can't do this. So we've lost a lot of money. It looks like we're going to have some serious customer disruption or dissatisfaction on the horizon, likely some additional revenue that we weren't even expecting to lose come up in the future. So my question is, if we as a Commonwealth, in the interest of best serving our customers or citizens out there, and the interest of cutting our losses, would offer this up for sale, saying we're getting out of this backbone business. Is there today a market by which the Commonwealth could cut our losses, our customers could be better served by offering this up for an auction?
You know, I think it's an excellent question. I will say I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that existence of that market. But to your point, you have a scenario in which, yes, the government is involved in what is essentially private contract, right? This is a scenario in which if they had informed leadership, they would know exactly what to do to reconfigure this. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not how it ought to be done, right? And so this is pretty simple. If you just take a moment to just think about this for one moment. You have a scenario in which you have someone who's performing in excellent fashion, and the most reliable indicator of it is KDE coming and telling you that's what's happening, and they're the most important of the very important customers we have, and we're performing in an excellent fashion. You know, the contract gives KCNA the right to say, we are canceling this contract for convenience. Stop making up pretend defaults that don't exist and say we're canceling for convenience. They won't do that because the contract gives us a put right, and they would have to pay us a fortune. And if they go along this path and this continues, they will at the end have to pay us a fortune. Going to the secretary and having her resolve disputes in the first instance is fine. Then you get to court, and then you get in front of a jury. They will end up having to pay, which is not what we want. What we want is to fix it. So the way to fix it, I would respectfully suggest, is not to sell it. It's get some competent leadership in there and say, sit down, stop with the litigation. We enjoin you now. Pull them on the carpet and say, start doing what you're supposed to be doing as a steward for the taxpayers. If they were enjoined to do it, this problem could be fixed in minutes.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda is the auditor's office. Lauren and Alexander, if you would come to the table and state your names and titles, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Lockett. I'm Lauren Hart-Ferguson, Chief of Staff for State Auditor Allison Ball.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Alex Magera, General Counsel for Auditor Ball.
Thank you for having us today. As this committee is well aware, Senate Bill 25 was passed this previous session, providing $1.5 million for the Auditor of Public Accounts to audit the very issue that we're hearing about today. And, you know, as Senator Williams said, this project started under Governor Steve Beshear. It's been ongoing. Kentuckians have been, I think, consistently believing that it's almost at its completion year by year. And we're seeing, as we all heard today, and as recent litigation shows, that we're probably further from the end than we even realized. We're further from completion than we realized. And so our boss in our office is really committed to answering two big questions that we think Kentuckians deserve to know the answers to, but we think you all are specifically interested in, and that's, why isn't this complete? And what do we need to do to get there? And so we would welcome any questions. We're at work on the audit, and we've begun the beginning stages of doing that, and we're happy to answer any questions that you all have today, or to hear, of course, any suggestions that you have for things that you'd like to see, obviously in addition to the ones we've already heard and been taking rapid notes about today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the auditor's office? Senator Williams? Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So you do a couple different kinds of audits. There's a financial or fiscal audit.
Yes.
But then there's maybe a performance audit or something like this. So this is a performance audit, I understand, not just a fiscal audit, or what is the nature of this audit?
Our office does complete numerous types of audits. There's the financial audit that Senator Williams is talking about. There also are special examinations. Recently we released one about the Kentucky Department of Education. That's kind of in that performance audit vein that you're talking about, Senator Williams. Performance audits have a really technical term in the auditing world, so we say special exam for now, as we're building up a performance division. Those haven't happened at the auditor's office for a few administrations, but they're something that our boss is really committed to doing. So you're talking about a special exam, and this will be a special examination. We also think it's really important to have a financial component to this. I mean, the dollars that we've heard today that we're hearing of, everyone that spoke today talked about this is built on the back of taxpayers, right? And so there is a financial cost, there's a financial impact. So those special examinations look at the money, but we also think it's important to look at the money as well in a traditional auditing financial sense.
Very good. So you're doing essentially both.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you currently familiar with the existing contract between Accelecom and KCNA?
Yes, we have some familiarity with that. Now, I wouldn't be comfortable answering in-depth questions about it. But we have some familiarity with that. The litigation that's ongoing, that's been referenced, we're familiar with that and are following that as it develops. And we've also been monitoring some of the underlying issues that are referenced in the litigation, right? There's this argument about procurement that you were alluding to, Senator Williams, and, what's the state's involvement in that? And in turn, what will that mean for arguments that are made about our office's ability to audit and participate in reviews of these entities? And Alex can dive into this in depth, but we feel confident that the auditor is rightly positioned to look at this and will do everything in her power to do so.
Representative All.
Just curious, are both parties actively cooperating with your request and audits in the proceedings?
So, as of now, yes. Alex leads our special exams division as well as being our general counsel, so I think he can answer that more in depth.
High level, yes. That's
High level, yes.
Yes, okay. And then, is there a different audit that Blue & Co. is doing? What is the delta? What's the difference? Why are there two audits? What's going on? What's that?
So that's been referenced to us. We're not involved in that. I think that's a separate part of their own. And there's a little bit of assumption happening here on my part based on what I've heard. But I think that Blue & Co. audit that's being referenced is separate and a part of their partnership and their contractual agreement. We're not involved in the Blue & Co. audit. We, the auditor has a wide purview, and we are constantly monitoring issues even several times before we've been asked by the General Assembly to conduct an audit. We've already got it on our radar, and we're like, as soon as we have the bandwidth or we're ready we finish this audit, we'll go to that one. And so this has already been on our radar, and we're excited to do this audit. But the Blue & Co., and I think that's separate and part of more linked to the litigation and those two parties working out their dispute. Thank you, Representative.
I think it is this committee's desire in terms of this whole day in discussion that we do get to the bottom of these issues. The bottom line is we are here as representatives of our districts and people to make sure that we are spending Kentucky's taxpayer dollars wisely, to make sure that we protect those dollars, that they are not being wasted, that we are not incurring costs over and above what we should. So that's the purpose, and I think all of us here are in agreement for that. So we certainly look forward to your findings from the office. Are there any other questions at all from the committee? You got one? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next meeting is going to be August.
Can I make an acknowledgement before that?
Hold on just a second. Yeah. Our next meeting will be August the 13th at 10 o'clock in the morning. And that will be chaired by my co-chair, Senator Williams, who has another announcement to make.
Yes, I just want to thank COT for being here during this meeting. They do lighting the dark fiber on the state-to-state agencies. They're here listening. Rick Woodruff here, who's been doing the network. And so they, on the state side, they're the ones that are making this work and having to deal with this. So thank you for being